I had just buried my mother 48 hours earlier when I stepped onto that first-class jet bridge, my Air Force uniform crisp, the captain's bars gleaming on my shoulders. The blonde flight attendant at the door barely glanced at me until her eyes narrowed. Within minutes, she would block my seat, lie about safety rules, and, in front of a silent cabin, slap me hard across the face. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. But behind my stillness was the authority to bring this entire aircraft to a standstill, and she had no idea what was coming. The hum of the terminal still carried the echoes of my mother's funeral. Just 48 hours ago, I'd stood at her graveside in Montgomery, the weight of my dress blues as heavy as the silence between family members too grief-stricken to speak. Now, my orders pulled me back to Washington, D.C. The mission was urgent, but the uniform was not for show. It was regulation for my travel, and the captain's bars on my shoulders carried meaning in every military space I'd ever stepped into. As I approached the gate, the boarding agent scanned my ticket, her professional smile softening when she registered my rank. "Thank you for your service, Captain Reed," she said warmly. That brief moment of respect was a small balm. I nodded, offering a quiet, "Appreciate it," before stepping onto the jet bridge. The air in the first-class cabin had that faint mix of leather, stale coffee, and perfume. A blonde flight attendant stood at the entry, hair pulled into a severe bun, lips pressed in a thin line. Her name tag read, Kara Flint. She looked at me, not with the polite neutrality you expect from crew, but with a flash of something sharper, assessing, questioning. "Right side, sir," she said curtly, already glancing past me to the man behind. I stepped forward, found 2A, and reached for the overhead bin. My military duffel, stiff with documents and gear I wasn't about to check, fit snugly above my seat. Or it would have, had Kara not suddenly materialized beside me. "Excuse me," she said, voice edged with authority she clearly enjoyed wielding. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" I looked at her, my tone even. "Yes, ma'am, 2A. Her palm lifted slightly. A silent demand. "Boarding pass, please." I handed it over without a word. She scrutinized it far longer than necessary, eyes darting between the paper and my face. "Our system can make mistakes," she murmured, as though to herself, yet loud enough for the man across the aisle to hear. He, a white-haired businessman in an impeccable suit, frowned slightly at the exchange. "Your bag," Kara continued, "is taking up too much space. You'll need to check it." "With respect, ma'am," I said, my voice still controlled. "This contains items that cannot be checked." "I don't care what it contains," she cut in sharply. "The bin is for everyone, not just you." I glanced up at the bin, nearly empty, except for my cap and that businessman's overstuffed briefcase and coat. "Perhaps I could place it here?" I gestured toward the open space. "That's reserved for emergency equipment," she replied, tone clipped. I knew the bin's contents well enough to recognize the lie, but I didn't challenge her. My instinct in situations like this was the same one drilled into me through deployments and inspections. Control the temperature of your voice, even when the room burns around you. Before I could respond, a voice came from behind. "Ma'am," the businessman said, leaning slightly into the aisle. "There's clearly room for his bag." Kara's head turned, her smile forced. "Sir, please return to your seat. We'll handle it." The dismissal was as clear as the subtext. Stay out of it. He hesitated, lips tightening, but sat back. That was the moment I caught something in Kara's eyes. She wasn't just enforcing some arbitrary policy. This was about putting me in my place. "May I speak with the captain or lead flight attendant?" I asked. "I'm the lead flight attendant for this section," she replied, her voice firm, as though the title were a weapon. "The captain is busy with pre-flight." I met her gaze steadily. Understood. It would have been easy to push back, to pull rank in ways she couldn't begin to anticipate. But there's a certain power in letting someone underestimate you. In the Air Force, you learn when to let the silence work for you. Kara, perhaps expecting me to protest, lingered a moment too long before moving on. The businessman across the aisle caught my eye, gave the smallest shake of his head. Disbelief, shared silently between strangers. I settled into my seat, hands folded loosely in my lap. From the outside, I must have looked calm, indifferent even. Inside, the edges of my patience were already fraying. My mother had raised me with a simple creed: never give anyone the satisfaction of seeing you lose your composure. And in this moment, more than ever, I could feel her voice in my head, urging restraint. The boarding continued, passengers filling the cabin. I kept my gaze out the window, the tarmac a blur of movement. But in my periphery, I caught Kara's glance every time she passed, quick, assessing, as though waiting for me to slip. The businessman's voice broke the silence. "I've been flying this route for 15 years, he said quietly, leaning toward me. Never seen anyone questioned like that in first class, not once. I offered him a faint smile. First time for everything. The engines whined as the aircraft powered up, the cabin shifting with the subtle vibration of readiness. I could feel the day's weight pressing into me, the funeral, the mission ahead. And now this unnecessary confrontation. Yet part of me knew. I had been in enough hostile negotiations, enough tense airspace, to sense when an encounter was only the opening move. Kara walked by again, this time offering drinks to the row ahead of me. She didn't even glance in my direction. The businessman's brows knit in disapproval, but I stayed still. Every inch of my training told me that patience would yield the greater advantage. For now, I let her believe she had won the first exchange. Let her believe she'd put me in my place. Because when the time came, the correction wouldn't just be personal, it would be procedural, official, unavoidable, and she wouldn't see it coming. The last of the boarding announcements faded as I adjusted in my seat, the worn leather creaking beneath me. I could feel the eyes of the businessman across the aisle. Later I'd learn his name was Brad Stone, still flicking my way every so often, as if trying to piece together what he had just witnessed. Beside me sat a woman in her late 30s, dark hair pinned back neatly, a leather briefcase under the seat in front of her. She'd been quiet through the boarding chaos, but now that the cabin door had closed, she turned slightly toward me. "That was unusual," she said softly, her voice carrying a measured, professional cadence. "Ava Sinclair." She extended her hand. I shook it lightly. "Marcus Reed." Her eyes lingered on my uniform for a moment, scanning the ribbons and badges like someone who knew what each meant. "Air Force," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am," I replied. "I work in civil rights law," she continued. "Specialize in public accommodations and transportation cases." There was a flicker in her eyes, part curiosity, part indignation at what she had just seen. What happened at boarding was textbook unequal treatment. I gave a faint smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I've learned not to read too much into first impressions." Ava tilted her head slightly, as if weighing how much to press. Before she could speak again, Kara's voice floated down the aisle, offering beverages to the first row. Brad Stone accepted a coffee. The passenger beside him got sparkling water. When Kara reached our row, her eyes passed over me without pause, her tray angled toward Ava. "For you, ma'am?" she asked. "Water, please," Ava replied, then glanced pointedly at me. Kara's lips pressed thin as she poured Ava's drink. Without meeting my gaze, she stepped past us entirely. Brad's frown deepened. "Excuse me," he called out to her. "This gentleman—" "I'll be right back," Kara cut him off, her tone syrupy but strained. She didn't return. I kept my hands folded, eyes on the seat back ahead, though inside, I catalogued every detail. Some part of me, conditioned through years of briefings, after-action reports, and covert evaluations, was already storing these moments for later use. "You're just going to let that slide?" Ava asked quietly, once Kara was out of earshot. "For now," I said. She studied me for a beat. "You look familiar." "I doubt it." "No," she insisted, leaning in slightly. "I'm sure I've seen you before. 2 years ago, there was a story, made the rounds on the networks. An Air Force officer led a high-altitude rescue in Afghanistan, brought a downed pilot out from enemy territory in a snowstorm. The photo, they blurred your face, but..." Her gaze flicked to the small scar near my temple. "It's you, isn't it?" I met her eyes evenly. "Ma'am, you must be mistaken." Her brows lifted, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You're good, but I'm better at reading people than most." I didn't answer. Denial was easier than explanation. In my line of work, confirming details to strangers was never wise, no matter their intentions. Ava didn't push, but the gleam in her eyes told me she was filing the suspicion away for later. Across the aisle, Brad leaned toward us. "Pardon me for eavesdropping, but if she's going to keep ignoring you, I'll make sure the purser hears about it. That's not how first class works, military or not." "I appreciate it," I said. "But sometimes the best statement is made without saying a word." He gave a short nod, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Kara resumed service, starting again from the front. She smiled easily at passengers, cracked a joke with one man in row 1, topped off Brad's coffee, but still skipped me without acknowledgement. Ava set her glass down with deliberate care. "Do you realize how blatant this is?" she whispered. "I do," I said. My voice was calm, but in my chest, the slow burn of something heavier than irritation had begun to spread. From my peripheral vision, I caught Kara glancing back at us, her expression unreadable. There was no sign of guilt, no flicker of recognition that her actions were out of line. Just that same cool detachment, as if I were a problem to be managed rather than a paying passenger. Ava opened her briefcase, pulling out a slim folder. "If this escalates, I can get sworn statements from half this cabin. People saw what happened in." "That won't be necessary," I replied, my tone leaving no room for debate. Not yet, anyway. For a while, we sat in silence, the hum of the engines filling the space between us. My gaze stayed forward, but my thoughts wandered. Back to the ceremony 2 days ago, the folded flag pressed into my hands, the sound of taps in the cold morning air, my mother's voice in my head. "Marcus, you don't need to shout to command a room." I could feel Ava watching me from time to time, perhaps trying to reconcile the stillness in my posture with the tension she could surely sense beneath it. When Kara passed again, Ava caught her attention. "Excuse me, my colleague here hasn't been offered anything to drink." Kara's smile was tight. "I'll get to him when I can." She moved on without slowing. Brad muttered something under his breath that I didn't catch, but the frustration was plain on his face. Ava leaned closer. "You have more patience than anyone I've ever met." I allowed myself a small, humorless smile. "Patience isn't the same as inaction." Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment I wondered if she could see what I was holding back. The authority that could alter the course of this flight with a single coded message. The training that taught me to wait until the move would be decisive. Kara disappeared into the galley. The clink of glasses and the muffled sound of ice in a scoop reached us, then faded. Ava sipped her water, still watching me. "You're going to do something, aren't you?" "When the time is right," I said. And as the cabin settled into the rhythm of the flight, I knew that time was coming faster than anyone else suspected. The seatbelt sign had been off for less than 20 minutes when the first jolt hit. It wasn't the gentle bump of light turbulence. It was the sharp, dropping shudder that makes every passenger's hand reach instinctively for the armrest. The aircraft rattled as another pocket of rough air slammed into us. A few gasps rippled through the cabin, followed by the captain's voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts immediately." Before I could reach for my belt, the plane dipped again, and with a hiss like a sudden breath, the oxygen masks dropped from the overhead panel. The yellow cups swung wildly on their tubes. To my right, the elderly man across the aisle fumbled with his mask, his hands trembling so badly he couldn't fit the straps over his head. Without thinking, I unbuckled, leaned across, and steadied it in place. "Here, sir, take a deep breath," I said, tightening the elastic around his head, ensuring the seal was firm. The mask inflated as it should, and I could see the panic in his eyes ease just a fraction. That's when I heard the sharp staccato steps, heels striking the carpet with precision. Kara appeared in my peripheral vision, her face flushed with something that wasn't just from the turbulence. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice pitched high enough for half the cabin to hear. I straightened slowly, keeping my tone even. "Assisting this gentleman with his mask. He was having trouble." "You are interfering with safety procedures," she snapped. "Passengers are not authorized to assist each other. That's the crew's job." The old man tried to speak. "He was just helping." "Sir, please stay out of this." Kara cut him off, dismissing him like a child. I felt the weight of eyes on us. Ava's sharp gaze beside me, Brad leaning forward from across the aisle, other passengers peering between headrests. "I have emergency training through the military," I said, still calm. "The gentleman needed immediate assistance." "I don't care if you're the Secretary of Defense," Kara shot back, her voice sharpening. "On this aircraft, you follow my instructions." I held her gaze, the air between us taut. "May I have your name, please? I'd like to file a formal complaint regarding your conduct." Her eyes narrowed into slits. "Are you threatening me?" "No, ma'am. I'm exercising my right as a passenger." The words cut short as her hand moved. It wasn't a warning gesture, not the brush of someone trying to get attention. It was a deliberate, open-handed strike that connected with my cheek hard enough to turn my head. The sound was crisp, obscene in its clarity against the sudden hush of the cabin. For 2 seconds, I didn't move, didn't speak. My training screamed to control my reaction. I turned back to her, my face neutral, but my eyes, cold, flat, unblinking, held hers like the still point in a storm. Around us, the silence fractured into sharp inhales and the quiet rustle of phones being raised. Somewhere behind me, a voice muttered, "Did she just—" Ava's tone was steel. "I have that on video." Brad was already halfway out of his seat, but I lifted a hand fractionally, stopping him. "I did not threaten you," I said, my voice as calm as if I were reading coordinates. "But you have just committed battery against a military officer." Her mouth twisted. "You were aggressive. You were intimidating my crew." Then she turned. This was the twist I'd anticipated in other forms, but not like this, and raised her voice for all to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this passenger has been disruptive and threatening to the flight crew. We are following procedure to ensure everyone's safety." A low murmur began, some passengers shifting uncomfortably, others glancing at me with uncertainty. Her framing of the narrative was quick, confident, and calculated. It was the kind of move I'd seen in interrogations, a rapid claim made loudly enough to plant doubt before the other side can respond. Ava bristled. "That's a lie," she said, but Kara had already stepped back, turning toward the galley as if her part was done. The elderly man tried again. "He was helping me." "Sir," Kara called over her shoulder without looking back, "please remain seated for the safety of everyone on board." I settled back into my seat, the sting on my cheek already fading into a dull burn. Inside, though, the calculus had shifted. This wasn't just personal misconduct, it was an operational breach. The moment her hand made contact, she had crossed into territory that my orders covered explicitly. Ava leaned in, her voice low but urgent. "She's flipping the story before the captain even hears it." "I know," I said. Brad's voice carried across the aisle. "Every person in this section saw what really happened. Don't let her spin it." I gave a slight nod. "I won't." The murmur in the cabin continued, some voices defending me, others whispering confusion. Kara's move had worked on at least a few, planting that seed of doubt so that when the official version came, they'd be primed to believe her. She didn't know that in doing so, she'd just activated the one card I had no hesitation playing, and she would never see it coming. The seatbelt sign had barely clicked off again when I saw her, Maya Ortiz, making her way down the aisle. Her steps were quick, purposeful. but her eyes betrayed a hint of conflict. She had been there during boarding, had seen enough to know this wasn't just another passenger dispute. She stopped beside my row, crouched slightly so her voice would carry only to me. "Captain Reed," she said quietly, "could you come with me for a moment?" Ava's head turned sharply. "Where are you taking him?" "To speak with the captain," Maya replied, her tone neutral but her gaze holding mine just a fraction too long. A silent signal. This was important. I unbuckled my belt, stood, and followed her down the narrow aisle. The murmur of conversation swelled around us, passengers craning to see. Brad Stone gave me a tight nod as I passed his seat. We reached the reinforced cockpit door. Maya rapped in a specific pattern, 2 short, 1 long, then leaned toward the security camera. "It's Ortiz, requesting entry. I have a passenger who needs to speak with Captain Holden." There was a pause, then the mechanical clunk of locks, disengaging. The door swung open to reveal the narrow entryway and the back of the captain's chair. Rick Holden was a tall man, his salt and pepper hair visible even beneath the headset. He glanced over his shoulder, irritation already creasing his brow. "Maya, what's so—" I stepped forward, reaching into the inner pocket of my uniform jacket. The leather case slid out smoothly, and with one motion, I flipped it open. Federal Aviation Administration, Department of Defense Air Carrier Compliance Inspector, Alpha Clearance. Holden's expression changed instantly, the irritation drained, replaced by a hard-edged focus. "You're not just here as a passenger." "No, sir," I said evenly. "We have an operational breach in the cabin. Lead flight attendant Kara Flint has committed physical assault on a passenger, in this case, myself, while executing a pattern of discriminatory behavior documented by multiple witnesses. Under Joint Directive 7734 and FAA Regulation 121.5547, I am compelled to address this immediately." Holden's jaw worked as he absorbed the weight of the words. In the right, or wrong, circumstances, a breach like this could trigger cascading consequences for the airline, the crew, and even the flight itself. "I need you to detail exactly what—" he began. But the cockpit door suddenly swung wider behind me. Kara's voice cut in, sharp and urgent. "Captain, this passenger is causing a disruption and making threats against crew members." The air in the cockpit thickened. Holden's eyes flicked between us, reading the tension. I turned slowly to face her. "Ms. Flint," I said, my voice flat as cold steel, "this is a restricted area." She ignored me, stepping closer to Holden. "Sir, I'm responsible for passenger safety in my section. He's been confrontational since boarding. He's intimidating people. You can't just let him—" Holden raised a hand, his voice tight. "Ms. Flint, do you understand who you're speaking about?" Kara's chin lifted. A disruptive passenger in a military costume, trying to use intimidation tactics. I heard Ava's voice in my head from earlier. "You're just going to let that slide?" And decided the time for silence had passed. I turned the credential case so Kara could see it clearly. Her eyes flicked down, confusion crossing her face as she registered the seals, the clearances, the interagency insignia. "This isn't real," she said quickly, her voice climbing. "You probably printed that yourself." Holden's tone dropped to something lethal. "That's enough, Ms. Flint. Captain Reed holds authority in this situation that supersedes mine. You will remain in the rear galley until further notice." "This is outrageous. One more word," Holden cut her off, "and I'll add insubordination to your list of violations." The flash of anger in Kara's eyes could have lit the panel displays, but she spun on her heel, muttering something under her breath, and disappeared back through the door. Holden exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "All right, Captain Reed. Tell me exactly what you need." "I am formally declaring a security breach," I said. "Given the crew members' instability and conduct, this aircraft should divert to the nearest suitable airport for a full security assessment. Charlotte Douglas International is optimal from our current position." Holden hesitated. "We can deal with her when we land in D.C. Diverting is going to—" "Save you from explaining to the FAA why a physically aggressive crew member remained on duty for another hour," I interrupted. my tone still calm but final. His silence lasted only a moment before he gave a short nod. Understood. I'll notify ATC. As he reached for the comm panel, I stepped back toward the door. The sound of the locks engaging behind me was almost as satisfying as the first click of a safety harness before a combat sortie. Maya walked me back toward my seat, her voice low. That was something. She's not going to take it well. I met her gaze. She doesn't have to. She just has to stay out of the way until we're on the ground. We passed Brad, who raised his brows in silent question. I gave him the smallest nod, confirmation without detail. Sliding back into 2A, I caught Ava watching me with open curiosity. I take it that wasn't a friendly chat with the captain? She said. Friendly enough, I replied, for what it needed to be. From the corner of my eye, I saw Kara reappear at the far end of the cabin, her posture stiff, eyes locked anywhere but on me. The game had shifted. The next moves would matter even more. Back in my seat, I let the hum of the engines fill the silence. Ava's eyes were on me, a dozen unspoken questions hovering between us. Brad across the aisle leaned back, arms folded, as if settling in to see what came next. I slid my hand inside my jacket again, retrieving the slim black device that never left my person when traveling on assignment. To anyone else, it would look like a compact, secure phone. To those who knew, it was an encrypted terminal with direct access to interagency operational channels. Thumbprint, retinal scan, authorization code, Cascade Alpha, initiate. The prompt came up in crisp white letters on the matte screen. I entered the coordinates, the flight number, and the nature of the breach. Crew integrity failure, physical assault, discrimination under service provision. Final confirmation, request immediate diversion to nearest suitable airport. The message vanished into secure channels, bouncing between FAA command nodes and DoD liaison servers. Within 30 seconds, it would hit every relevant control point, including Captain Holden's console. I closed the device and returned it to my pocket without a word. Ava didn't press, but I saw the way she studied me, as if she'd caught the faintest scent of something significant in my stillness. 5 minutes later, Holden's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We're in communication with air traffic control regarding a potential diversion due to an operational matter. The cabin murmured. Passengers glanced at one another. I kept my gaze forward. A faint chime came from the forward galley. Maya's head appeared around the corner, and she gestured discreetly toward the cockpit. I rose, Ava's whisper following me. You're making this happen, aren't you? In the cockpit, Holden's expression was tight. I've received your cascade order, but I've also just been pinged by corporate ops. They're advising against diverting, saying we should handle the matter in DC with minimal disruption. His voice carried a weight I recognized. An experienced pilot caught between protocol and corporate pressure. They're worried about delays, passenger inconvenience, media fallout. I kept my tone measured. Captain, FAA Regulation 121.547, combined with Joint Directive 7734, gives me full authority to override operational discretion in the event of a critical crew integrity breach. This isn't about inconvenience. It's about the fact that a physically aggressive crew member remains on board in uniform, still in proximity to passengers. Holden rubbed his temple. You know what diverting means. Headlines, lost connections, angry passengers. Better headlines than subpoenas, I said. You divert now, you can frame this as a procedural safety call. You wait, and a dozen videos will surface showing that you let a known aggressor work another hour after assaulting a passenger. One who, incidentally, is an FAA DoD inspector. Which do you think corporate will prefer explaining to Congress? His jaw flexed. He glanced to his right, the co-pilot watching silently, clearly tracking every word. The co-pilot finally spoke. Sir, with respect, if she's volatile enough to slap a passenger in front of witnesses, what happens if we hit another turbulence event or a medical emergency? You'll be answering for more than PR fallout. Holden's eyes narrowed slightly. Not at me, but at the mental math the co-pilot had just forced him to do. I didn't fill the silence. In negotiation, especially high-stakes quiet can be as powerful as any argument. Finally, he exhaled. "All right, Charlotte it is." I gave a single nod. "I'll return to my seat. You handle ATC." As I turned, Holden stopped me. "For what it's worth, Captain Reed, I don't like being pressured. But you're right." Back in the aisle, Maya intercepted me. "So? Get ready," I said. The change was subtle at first. A slight banking of the aircraft, the shift in engine pitch as the new heading locked in. Then Holden's voice came over the PA again, carefully neutral. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an operational matter, we will be making an unscheduled landing at Charlotte Douglas International. Estimated arrival in 25 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The cabin buzzed with whispers. I caught snippets. "Mechanical issue? Is it weather? Somebody sick?" Kara emerged from the rear galley, her eyes scanning the cabin, clearly picking up the shift in atmosphere. When she saw me seated, calm, hands folded, something in her expression tightened. She knew something was moving beyond her control. Ava leaned toward me. "So, Charlotte?" I kept my voice low. "Charlotte." Her mouth curved in a slow smile. "Good." From across the aisle, Brad gave me the faintest salute. Kara, meanwhile, began moving down the aisle, stopping to chat with passengers in a transparent attempt to control the narrative. I didn't engage. Let her talk. The real conversation was already out of her reach. 25 minutes. Then the real consequences would begin. The descent into Charlotte came faster than most passengers expected. From the window, the patchwork of suburbs and highways expanded beneath us, the midday light glinting off rooftops and car windshields. The usual rhythm of landing, seatbelt signs, crew securing the cabin, was there. But under it ran a taut thread of tension. When the wheels touched down with a firm double bump, the reverse thrusters roared, pressing us into our seats. The cabin exhaled as one. No cheer, no applause. Just a hum of speculation. As we taxied off the runway, I noticed the line of vehicles parked near the private gates. 2 dark SUVs with government plates, a white airport operations van, and, just beyond them, a black sedan with the seal of the FAA stenciled discreetly on the door. Brad leaned slightly across the aisle. "Looks like someone's rolling out the welcome mat for you." I didn't reply. The aircraft came to a stop at a remote stand, far from the main terminal. The seatbelt sign stayed on. Then the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We will be met by authorized personnel before deplaning." The forward door opened, and the first figure to step aboard was a woman in her 40s, professional in a navy suit with an airline ID clipped to her jacket. Amanda Torres, Director of In-Flight Services, Eastern Region. Her gaze swept the cabin like she was assessing damage from a storm. Behind her came 2 men in dark suits with earpieces, the posture, the scanning eyes marking them as federal agents. One carried a slim folder, the other a tablet already recording. They moved with purpose down the aisle, stopping at my row. "Captain Reed?" Torres asked, her voice polite but brisk. "Yes. I'd like to speak with you in a secure location," she said, the faintest note of deference under her formality. "We have procedures to follow." I stood, feeling every pair of eyes in the cabin follow the movement. Ava squeezed my arm briefly as I stepped into the aisle. Brad gave a quiet, "We've got your back," under his breath. The agents flanked me as we moved forward. From somewhere behind us, the tinny sound of a phone on speaker carried. "And we're live from inside the plane that just diverted to Charlotte." I glanced sideways. 3 rows back, a young man held his phone high, camera pointed toward the aisle, his voice streaming into the internet. The screen was full of live comments flying upward in rapid fire. "What's going on? Is that the guy who got hit?" "Justice for Marcus," Torres noticed too, her jaw tightening. "Control that, please," she murmured to one of the agents. But it was already too late. As we stepped into the jet bridge, my own phone vibrated in my pocket. One glance at the preview text told me enough. "Marcus, you're trending. Call me ASAP." It was from a Pentagon liaison. The secure conference room inside the terminal was already set up. Bottled water on the table, a closed laptop waiting for me to log an official preliminary statement. Torres began. "Captain Reed, before we proceed..." The door opened again. A young man in a blazer stepped in, his badge reading Corporate Communications, HQ. His expression was the polished calm of someone trained to handle crises before cameras. "Mr. Reed," he began, deliberately avoiding my rank, "I'm here to address the situation from a corporate standpoint." I let him talk. "Our preliminary understanding is that there was a disagreement with a crew member that escalated unnecessarily. While we regret any distress caused, it's important to note that disruptive passenger behavior can create safety risks. Our spokesperson will be making a statement to that effect shortly to avoid misinformation spreading unchecked." Torres stiffened beside him. She knew exactly how those words would land in the public sphere. I raised one brow. "So your strategy is to smear a federal inspector before you've even reviewed the full witness accounts?" He kept his voice smooth. "Our goal is to protect the company and reassure the traveling public." The irony almost made me laugh. Outside the conference room, the hum of foot traffic was punctuated by the occasional shout of a news crew corralling passengers for interviews. One of the agents tapped his tablet, showing me the trending feed. Dozens of passenger shot videos, boarding, the baggage dispute, Kara ignoring me during service, the slap, were already viral. The hashtag #Justice for Marcus was climbing past 50,000 mentions an hour. "Your corporate statement will be competing with this," I said, sliding the tablet back across the table. The comms officer's jaw tightened just for a moment before he recovered his neutral mask. Torres spoke then, her tone measured but firm. "Until we have all the facts, I advise refraining from public statements that could compromise the investigation or expose us to liability." He hesitated, then gave a short nod. "I'll convey that to HQ." When he left, Torres turned to me. "Captain Reed, we'll need a full debrief, but I can tell you now, between the witness videos and your credentials, this isn't going to be contained quietly." "That was never my goal," I said. "My goal is accountability." From my pocket, the phone buzzed again. Another message from the Pentagon. "Do not engage with media. Focus on process. We'll handle strategic response." I looked toward the window. Out on the tarmac, Kara was being escorted down the air stairs by airport security, her posture rigid, chin high. Even now, she seemed convinced she could talk her way out of this. But the tide was already moving, and she didn't see how far it had turned against her. The conference room felt colder than the terminal outside. The hum of the HVAC a steady undertone beneath the buzz of electronics. A wall-mounted monitor flickered to life, splitting into 4 quadrants, each a different passenger's phone footage. Torres stood beside the screen, a remote in her hand. "We've compiled the most complete timeline from passenger submissions," she said. "You'll want to see this." The first feed showed boarding. Kara at the door, glancing past me without acknowledgement. The second cut to the baggage dispute, my duffel hanging mid-air while she blocked the bin. A third angle caught her ignoring my water request, pivoting on a smile to serve the passenger beside me. Then came the slap. In the synchronized playback, you could hear the intake of breath ripple through the cabin before the collective silence. The impact was undeniable. Torres froze the frame. No audio manipulation, no cuts. She looked at the suits from the federal side. "Your assessment." One agent, a tall man with close-cropped hair, leaned forward. "It's clean. Multiple sources confirm sequence of events. That's enough to classify this as assault on a federal officer." I confirmed my name and credentials, sliding my leather ID case across the table. "Captain Marcus Reed, United States Air Force, Embedded FAA DoD Inspector, Alpha Clearance, currently assigned to covert operational readiness evaluations. The agent's eyes sharpened. Then, unexpectedly, his expression shifted. Wait a second. Afghanistan, 2019? I met his gaze. You pulled a downed pilot out of a burning A-29 before the fuel tanks went. Lost half your kit in the fire. He shook his head slowly. I was in the convoy that picked you up. Didn't think I'd ever meet you again. A flicker of recognition passed between us. Shared memory compressed into a few words. It hung in the air like an unspoken testimony to something bigger than the footage on the screen. That was the upward swell in the room. Respect. Maybe even admiration. It softened the lines around Torres's eyes, pulled Brad's mouth into a subtle grin from his seat against the wall. Ava tilted her head like a puzzle piece had just clicked. The warmth lasted all of 30 seconds. The door opened and a woman in a dark gray skirt suit entered, carrying a slim briefcase. Her ID read Corporate Legal Counsel. Without preamble, she set a manila folder on the table and slid it toward Torres. This is the company's internal review file on Captain Reed, she said, her voice smooth as marble. Includes an incident report from last year. Torres glanced at me before opening it. Her eyes scanned the page, then narrowed. The lawyer continued. Our records indicate that during a flight from San Diego to Dallas, Captain Reed engaged in a verbal altercation with crew over a security procedure. Witness statements describe his demeanor as confrontational. The report notes his removal from the aircraft by airport police. That's a gross distortion, I began, but she held up a hand. You'll have your chance to respond, she said coolly. For now, the point is this. Our legal position will need to account for a documented pattern of challenging crew authority. It was a masterstroke of corporate defense. Introduced doubt, framed the narrative before I could counter. And for anyone in the room who didn't know me, it landed like a drop of ink in clear water, clouding the image they'd just seen on the monitor. Ava's brow furrowed, but she stayed silent. Brad's jaw tightened. The agent who'd recognized me shifted in his seat, his earlier warmth dimmed by the implication. I could feel the pendulum swinging. What had been a moment of vindication now teetered on the edge of skepticism. Torres closed the folder deliberately, her gaze moving between us. We'll need to reconcile these accounts before moving forward. Until then, any official statement will remain provisional. The corporate lawyer gave a small, satisfied nod. In my chest, the anger stayed cold. The same kind of cold that steadies your hands under fire. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue the details. Yet, I simply fixed the lawyer with the same steady look I'd given Kara before she slapped me. There would be a time to dismantle that report, line by line. But right now, the room had shifted, and everyone knew it. Ava's chair scraped back across the polished floor, a deliberate sound that cut through the tension like a blade. She rose, portfolio in hand, her gaze fixed on the corporate lawyer as if she were back in a courtroom. I'm glad you brought up patterns, Ava said, her voice steady but edged with something sharper. She flipped open a folder of her own, thicker than the manila file that had just cast shadows over me. Because we've obtained independent documentation of Ms. Kara Flint's conduct over the last 3 years. She slid a stack of papers across the table to Torres first, bypassing the lawyer entirely. Passenger complaints filed directly to the DOT, not just to the airline. At least 7 describe racially biased treatment, 2 cite safety rule misapplication, and 1, she tapped a page for emphasis, involved physical contact deemed excessive and unnecessary by an FAA inquiry. Torres's brow knit. The agents leaned forward. Even Brad Stone shifted in his chair to get a better look. The lawyer reached for the stack, but Ava held up a hand. Copies will be available for counsel after review by the federal representatives, she said crisply. Then she turned to Torres. Notice a pattern? Every single one of these complaints was resolved internally with no disciplinary action. The explanations range from passenger misunderstanding to staff stress due to operational delays. The air in the room thickened. Kara, seated at the far end, had gone rigid, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the armrest. Torres exhaled slowly. Given this new information, and the corroborating video evidence from today's incident, she straightened in her chair, her tone formal. Ms. Flint, you are suspended from duty effective immediately, pending full investigation. You will surrender your ID badge and company devices before leaving the premises. Kara's eyes went wide, then narrowed into slits. This is a witch hunt, she spat. You're all just piling on because he's… She stopped herself, but the unfinished sentence hung in the air like smoke. Careful, Ava warned quietly, her voice carrying more weight than volume. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the HVAC and the shuffle of papers. Then Maya Ortiz, who had been standing near the back wall, stepped forward. Her voice was low but clear. You all might as well know, this isn't just about Kara. Her direct supervisor in in-flight services is Thomas Flint. He happens to be the cousin of Vice President Richard Danner. The revelation landed like a dull thud, followed by the rustle of shifting in seats. That's why complaints went nowhere, Maya continued. Every time one came in, Thomas would review it and mark it as unfounded before it ever reached corporate HR. I've seen it happen. Torres's lips pressed into a thin line. That's a serious allegation, Ms. Ortiz. It's not an allegation if you've watched him do it, Maya replied, unflinching. The agents exchanged glances. One made a note in a small leather-bound book. The corporate lawyer's face tightened, controlled, but clearly calculating the damage control required. For my part, I didn't move. I let the information ripple through the room, let them connect the dots themselves. I'd learned long ago that sometimes the most effective move was to say nothing and watch others trip over the truth. Brad caught my eye, a faint nod passing between us. Ava, still standing, looked over her shoulder at me. There was a flicker of something there, not triumph exactly, but the satisfaction of pushing a weighty piece into place on the board. Kara slammed her chair back and stood. You think this is over? Thomas will have my back. This whole thing will blow over in a week. Torres's gaze was ice. You're done here, Ms. Flint. Security will escort you out. Two uniformed airport officers entered quietly, positioning themselves on either side of Kara. She hesitated, then stalked toward the door, muttering something under her breath. When the door clicked shut behind her, the room seemed to breathe again. I leaned back slightly, still calm on the surface. But behind that stillness, gears were turning. Kara's suspension was a step, but not the end game. If Maya's revelation was accurate, this was bigger than one flight attendant's prejudice. This was a rot threaded into the airline's chain of command. The Cascade protocols weren't just about security threats in the cabin. They were about systemic vulnerabilities. And nepotism shielding misconduct from scrutiny? That was a vulnerability I could not ignore. Torres was already speaking with the agents about next steps, but my focus had shifted. A systemic strike was forming in my mind. This wouldn't be about embarrassing one person. It would be about exposing a network, forcing the system to excise its own infection. For now, though, I stayed silent, letting the others think the battle was won. The real war was only beginning. The conference room was empty now except for me, Ava, and the two federal agents. Outside, muted voices drifted through the frosted glass. Corporate PR and legal scrambling in hushed tones. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and paper, the leftovers of a long day that had stripped the polish off every professional mask in the building. Agent Sloan broke the silence. We've already started digging. The nepotism connection checks out. Thomas Flint's been bearing misconduct complaints for at least 5 years. He's not the only one. There's a chain. I leaned forward. How high does it go? Sloan glanced at his partner before answering. Up to at least 2 senior VPs, possibly higher. FAA oversight flagged multiple anomalies in your airline's incident reporting. Complaints closed without review, safety violations coded as training notes, disciplinary actions rescinded without explanation. Ava exhaled slowly. That's not just bias. That's systemic obstruction. It's more than that, Sloan said. When a crew member with documented instability is kept in the field, it becomes a safety hazard. And when the system is designed to protect that instability, that's a national security concern. My jaw tightened. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed carried weight. Cascade Protocol wasn't a suggestion. It was my mandate. And now it wasn't just Kara Flint on trial. It was the entire operational integrity of a major U.S. carrier. Torres re-entered with a corporate lawyer I hadn't seen before. Tall, silver hair, bespoke suit. He didn't waste time. "Captain Reed," he began, voice smooth as glass. "The airline acknowledges your negative experience today. We're prepared to make amends, substantially. Monetary compensation, a formal apology, internal corrective action. In exchange, we'd ask you to sign a non-disclosure agreement covering the details of this incident and any internal findings." Ava's brows shot up. "You want him to take a payout and keep quiet while you sweep this under the rug?" The lawyer didn't flinch. "We want to avoid a media circus that could harm all parties. A settlement ensures corrective measures can be taken without fueling public outrage." "Public outrage is the point," Ava snapped. "It's accountability." He looked back at me, ignoring her. "You've served your country. I respect that. But you also know sometimes the mission is best served by controlling information. We're offering you a way to resolve this quickly without collateral damage." Collateral damage. That was corporate speak for reputational freefall. But I could read the subtext. They weren't just afraid of embarrassment. They were afraid of exposure, and they thought I could be bought into silence. I kept my tone even. "And if I refuse?" His jaw flexed. "Then this goes public. It will get messy. The narrative could shift. You've already seen the first wave. Some are painting you as disruptive. It's easier than you think for the story to turn against you." He wasn't wrong. I'd seen how quickly public opinion could pivot. But fear wasn't my operating principle. I leaned back. "You're offering me money to ignore a rot in your system that endangers passengers. That's not going to happen." Torres spoke up, her voice tighter than before. "Captain Reed, if this escalates, it could cost thousands of jobs. Then maybe the company should have thought about that before protecting nepotism over safety," I said, sharper now. "You're asking me to compromise my oath. That's not for sale." Sloan's partner, Agent Kim, slid a document across the table toward me. The interagency agreement under Cascade includes an extraordinary clause: the right to bypass internal resolution and submit a public report to both the FAA and the Department of Transportation. That report becomes part of the federal record, accessible to the press under the Freedom of Information Act. The silver-haired lawyer's composure cracked for a split second. "That would trigger a media disaster." Ava's eyes met mine. She didn't have to say it. This was the moment. The decision that would define whether today was a bad memory or a turning point. I picked up the pen. "Then let's make it official." The lawyer started to speak, but I was already signing. The stroke of ink felt heavier than it should have, like each letter pressed deeper into the page than paper alone. Kim countersigned, stamping it with the interagency seal. Sloan gathered the paperwork. "We'll transmit this to both agencies within the hour. Once it's in the system, it's irreversible." The room shifted. Torres looked pale. The lawyer gathered his files, muttering about contingency plans. Ava sat back, a slow, satisfied exhale escaping her. 2 hours later, the terminal was buzzing when we emerged from the secure conference room. Not the casual hum of travelers. This was sharper, more electric. Dozens of cell phones were out, screens lit with the same trending feed. Justice for Marcus had broken containment. It wasn't just passengers anymore. News anchors were running my photo, some in uniform, some from today's video freeze frames. Cable news Chiron screamed, "Airline scandal widens, federal probe underway." Corporate PR's worst nightmare was unfolding in real time. And it was about to get worse. At gate C-17, a local station was live. The reporter's voice carried, "Sources now confirm the Department of Transportation has received a formal report citing systemic misconduct and obstruction of safety oversight within the airline." They didn't have to say my name. Everyone listening knew. Ava leaned toward me. "They'll double down on the smear campaign now. Expect them to dig for anything in your past they can spin." I shrugged. "Let them. I'm not hiding." The agents stayed close as we walked toward the exit. Behind us, I could hear snippets, passengers telling their own stories, some unrelated to today but fitting the same pattern. The narrative was growing legs, corporate HQ, same time. In a glass tower 2 states away, an emergency board meeting was underway. Senior executives pored over crisis management briefs, media heat maps, and stock tickers bleeding red. Internal emails leaked within minutes to industry blogs. The consensus was grim. The Cascade report meant they couldn't contain this internally. Every regulatory body with a stake in aviation was now watching. Vice President Richard Danner, the cousin protecting Thomas Flint, was conspicuously absent. Medical leave, according to the memo. Insiders knew better. Back in Charlotte, Agent Kim's phone buzzed. She checked the screen and looked up at me. "FA Director wants to speak with you personally." I took the call. "Captain Reed," the voice came, brisk but warm. "I've reviewed your report. You've done exactly what we need. Cut through the noise and put the facts on record. This will initiate a full operational audit, not just on this carrier, but any with similar patterns." "Understood, sir. One more thing," the director said. "There's going to be blowback. Hold your ground. We'll back you." The line went dead. That night, in the quiet of a government-provided hotel room, I stood by the window, overlooking the city. Neon signs flickered in the rain-slicked streets. Somewhere down there, life was carrying on. People boarding flights, trusting crews to treat them with dignity and keep them safe. Today had ripped open the hull, and the rot was spilling into the light. The settlement offer had been their chance to keep it sealed. My refusal had ensured it would fester no more in the dark. I wasn't naive. This wouldn't end neatly, but the moment that pen touched paper in that conference room, I'd committed to more than my own vindication. I'd committed to dismantling a shield built to protect the worst instincts in people entrusted with the skies. And in the morning, the real storm would begin. The hearing room smelled faintly of old wood and the press of too many bodies in too small a space. Cameras lined the back wall, their red lights like a field of watchful eyes. I sat at the witness table beside Ava, the polished surface between us and the senators reflecting the weight of what was about to unfold. Senator Graham, chair of the committee, rapped the gavel. "This hearing of the Senate Transportation and Security Oversight Committee is now in session. Our purpose today is to address recent allegations of systemic misconduct, racial bias, and safety obstruction within the commercial airline industry." I adjusted the microphone. My uniform was immaculate, my captain's bars catching the light, but I could feel the hum in my chest, the tension of knowing that every word would be dissected in real time. "Captain Marcus Reed," Graham began, "you are currently a commissioned officer in the United States Air Force and hold Alpha clearance with the FAA's Joint Oversight Task Force, correct?" "Yes, sir," he gestured. "Proceed with your statement." I outlined the events as they had happened. No embellishment, no theatrics. Detailing Kara Flint's actions, the systemic concealment of prior complaints, and the corporate attempt to silence me with a non-disclosure agreement. Ava slid packets of corroborating witness statements across the table to the clerk, each sealed in clear evidence sleeves. Behind me, in the public gallery, I caught sight of Maya Ortiz. She sat forward, her posture alert, eyes fixed on the panel. She'd already submitted her whistleblower declaration, naming the management ties that shielded Kara from accountability. It was risky for her, career-ending even, but she'd done it anyway. The CEO of the airline, Leonard Harrington, sat 2 seats down at the next witness table. His tailored suit and measured breathing screamed practiced control. He kept his gaze steady until Senator Graham dropped the first direct hit. "Mr. Harrington, Our review of your company's internal data shows minority passengers are statistically more likely to face seat assignment challenges, overhead bin disputes, and denial of service. Explain that. Harrington cleared his throat. Senator, we do not discriminate. Any disparities are... Spare me the PR, Graham cut in. These numbers come from your own systems. This is bias with a data trail. I kept my expression neutral, letting the weight of the exchange speak for itself. Midway through the hearing, the temperature shifted. Senator Cole, a conservative from the Midwest, leaned forward, his voice mild but loaded. Captain Reed, no one doubts your service, but how can we be certain your actions weren't colored by personal bias or an agenda? Isn't it possible that your reaction escalated an isolated incident into a national crisis? The question landed heavy in the room. A ripple passed through the audience. Cole was framing me not as a protector of safety, but as a man with a grudge. I kept my tone even. Senator, Cascade Protocol doesn't allow for personal interpretation. The regulations require immediate action when a crew member's behavior presents a safety risk. My decision was by the book. Cole pressed. Still, public perception matters, and to some, this looks like overreach. Before I could answer, a new voice cut through the air. Senator, with respect, perception doesn't override reality. Heads turned as a man in a crisp, dark suit stepped forward from the gallery. His silver hair caught the lights, and the rows behind him parted without a word. Colonel Walter Reed, USAF return, my father. The chair recognized him instantly. Colonel, you have the floor. My father's voice was steady, each syllable deliberate. I flew combat missions over hostile airspace for this country. I've also sat on the board of this airline for 12 years. I know its strengths and its blind spots. What my son did wasn't overreach. It was duty. He looked directly at Senator Cole. You question his objectivity? This is a man who has led rescue ops under fire, who's carried wounded pilots out of burning aircraft. You think he diverted that plane because of ego? He diverted it because he knows that in the air, you don't gamble with unstable crew. You act. The chamber was silent except for the camera shutters. Then my father turned toward the rest of the committee. If this hearing does anything, it should make clear that reform is not optional. Bias in the cabin is a crack in the hull, and cracks, if ignored, will sink the ship, whether it's a warbird or a passenger jet. The room shifted with him. His words weren't just paternal defense. They were a call to action from someone who'd walked both worlds, the military and the boardroom. By the time we recessed, the tone of the coverage outside had changed. The networks weren't looping Senator Cole's challenge anymore. They were replaying my father's speech, cutting it against footage of the viral slap. The hashtags now joined by a new one, #FixTheHull. The fight wasn't over, not by a long stretch, but in that moment, I could feel the current turning. The vote came down on a gray Thursday morning, the kind of day that would normally fade into the background. But when the final tally flashed on the Senate board, 78 to 21 in favor, the air in the chamber shifted. The Reed Aviation Equality Act had passed. Ava grinned from across the table in the visitors section, her legal pad already dotted with next steps. Maya sat beside her, a quiet smile on her face. She'd traded her flight attendant's uniform for a blazer. She was here not as crew, but as a whistleblower whose courage had helped make this happen. The Act's provisions were sweeping. Within 6 months, the FAA would deploy what they were now calling the Reed Protocol, a framework designed to hardwire fairness and accountability into the airline industry. Anonymous compliance tests. Trained evaluators posing as passengers of different demographics would board flights unannounced, tracking disparities in treatment. Equity scorecards. Airlines would be rated quarterly on their consistency in service delivery, crew conduct, and complaint resolution, publicly posted for passengers to see. Independent Review Board. No more internal suppression. Complaints of bias or misconduct would be routed to a multi-agency panel with power to compel policy changes and levy penalties. I'd read the bill a dozen times during drafting. But seeing it passed into law was different. It was the kind of systemic change my father had fought for decades earlier, and it was surreal to realize it carried my name. By July, the FAA's Washington headquarters was a hive of activity. I had been assigned to oversee the Read protocol's first rollout phase. My office was stacked with reports from compliance trainers, draft scorecard templates, and meeting invites with airline executives who now viewed my name as both a caution and a mandate. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a training manual on unconscious bias, my assistant knocked. "Sir, there's someone here to see you. She says it's personal." I wasn't expecting visitors. "Send her in." The door opened, and in stepped Kara Flint. She looked different. The hair was the same pale blonde, but gone was the hard edge in her posture. She wore a simple navy dress, no makeup except a hint of mascara. Her eyes searched mine before she spoke. "Captain Reed," she began, her voice low. "I don't expect you to welcome me, but I wanted to tell you this in person." I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. She sat, folding her hands in her lap. "I've been in counseling," she said. "Mandatory at first. Then I kept going on my own. I've had to face things about myself I didn't want to see. The prejudices I told myself didn't exist. Turns out they were there, under the surface, shaping the way I treated people." I said nothing, letting her continue. "The airline terminated my position permanently. I could have fought it, I didn't. Instead, I asked if I could join the training program you're building. Not as a passenger, but as someone who's been on the wrong side of this. They agreed, if you approved it." I leaned back, studying her. "Why?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Because every time I see that video, I see the look in your eyes. Not anger, disappointment. And I realize, if someone like me can admit they were wrong and change, maybe the crews I train will believe they can too." For a long moment, the room was quiet except for the muted hum of the air conditioning. Finally, I nodded. "This protocol isn't about revenge, Ms. Flint. It's about ensuring the next crew member doesn't make the same choices you did. If you're serious about this, you'll have a hard road ahead. Some people won't trust your motives. Some will never forgive you." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I'm asking for the chance to make my failure mean something." 2 months later, I walked into a training session at the FAA's Atlanta facility. Kara stood at the front, speaking to a group of 30 new flight attendants. "And here's what I learned the hard way," she was saying. "Bias isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's in the small choices, who you greet warmly, whose requests you delay, whose complaints you dismiss. You may think you're being neutral, but the person on the receiving end can feel every ounce of difference." She didn't sugarcoat her own story. She told them exactly what she'd done, how it had spiraled, and what it had cost her. Some of the trainees shifted uncomfortably. Others scribbled notes. One young woman in the front row raised her hand. "So how do you stop yourself from doing what you did?" Kara's answer was simple. You check yourself. You ask, if this passenger were my mother, my friend, my commanding officer, would I treat them the same way? If the answer is no, change your behavior before it's too late. I stayed at the back of the room until the session ended. When the trainees filed out, a few glanced at me, recognition in their eyes from the headlines months earlier. Kara caught my gaze, gave a small nod, then turned back to collect her materials. By the year's end, the first batch of equity scorecards went live. Airlines that had embraced the changes saw their ratings surge, with customer satisfaction climbing alongside compliance. Those that resisted found themselves at the bottom of the rankings, pressured by both regulators and the court of public opinion. It wasn't perfect. No law or protocol could erase bias entirely, but the cracks in the hull were being sealed, one flight at a time. On a cold December morning, I boarded a flight from DC to Birmingham. The gate agent scanned my ticket without a second glance at my uniform. The young flight attendant at the door, a Latino man, smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, Captain. Seat 2A, right? Let me take your bag. The bin's clear for you." Small things, but the kind that add up. As I settled in, I thought of my mother. She told me once that the measure of a life isn't in titles or awards, but in whether you leave the place better than you found it. Looking out the window at the tarmac, I realized the Reed Protocol wasn't just a set of rules. It was proof that even in the rigid architecture of an industry, change was possible if enough people demanded it. And sometimes, the first demand was made in silence, with cold eyes that refused to look away. 6 months had passed since the Reed Protocol became law. Enough time for it to move from a headline to a working reality. Enough time for its early victories and its inevitable challenges to reveal themselves. Tonight, the proof of its quiet success sat all around me. I was on a late-night flight from Dallas to Washington, cruising at 35,000 feet. The cabin lighting was dim, the hum of the engine steady, and a diverse crew moved with the kind of unhurried confidence that only came from training and trust in the system they served. The lead flight attendant was a middle-aged black woman named Denise. Her co-lead was a young white man with sleeve tattoos peeking from under his uniform cuffs. The third crew member was a Filipino-American woman, and the fourth, a recent addition to the airline, was a tall Middle Eastern man who moved with military precision. It wasn't just their backgrounds that mattered. It was the way they interacted with passengers. Even tone, consistent attention, no hesitation in addressing needs regardless of appearance or seat number. Across the aisle, an elderly man in a cardigan asked for a blanket. Denise returned with it less than a minute later. Behind me, a teenage girl in a hoodie was reassured by the tattooed attendant that her allergy-safe snack had been loaded. These weren't headline-worthy acts, but they were the kind of daily moments that, months ago, too often broke along lines of bias. I sat in 3A, sipping coffee and letting my mind wander. The seat beside me was empty, until a familiar voice broke through the steady hum of the cabin. "Is this taken?" I looked up to see Ava Sinclair, smiling in that calm, measured way she had when she was about to deliver important news. "It's yours," I said, gesturing for her to sit. "What brings you to this flight?" She buckled in, setting her leather case at her feet. "I just came from Chicago, my first day in the new office." I raised an eyebrow. "New office?" Her smile widened. "The Department of Transportation, Civil Rights Division. I accepted the position last week." "That explains the case," I said, nodding toward the folder she was already unzipping. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across to me. "My official appointment letter. The secretary wants me to lead oversight on Reed Protocol implementation. And, here's the twist, you and I will be working as co-leads on the National Compliance Review." I let out a short laugh. "So, now you're my boss?" "Co-lead," she corrected, her eyes bright. "We'll be making site visits, reviewing scorecards, conducting field audits. The whole system runs better when the people who fought to build it are there to watch it grow." For the next hour, we spoke in low voices, trading updates. She told me about early cases the DIUT had already flagged. One airline quietly trying to game the equity scorecards by swapping crews on audit days. Another attempting to dilute complaint reporting by burying it in lengthy forms. "They'll learn," she said, "that the protocol isn't just policy, it's muscle memory. You can't fake it forever." I told her about Kara's work as a trainer, how she'd been met with skepticism, but had gradually won over crews with her blunt honesty about what she'd done and how it had nearly destroyed her career. "It's strange," Ava admitted. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have imagined her in that role. But maybe that's the point. Change doesn't always come from the perfect messenger. Somewhere over Kentucky, the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing our descent into Washington. I looked out the window. Below, the dark quilt of farmland was dotted with faint towns, each a small cluster of light in the vast night. For a moment, my thoughts drifted. Not to legislation, not to compliance charts, but to my mother. Her funeral had set this chain of events in motion, though she could never have guessed the scale of what would follow. I remembered her voice, soft but firm, telling me, "When you see something wrong, don't just avoid it. Fix it, even if it means you stand alone." That day on the aircraft, After Kara's hand struck my face, I had stood alone. At least I thought I had. But the months since had proven otherwise. Allies had stepped forward. Ava, Maya, Brad Stone, even passengers who'd been strangers until that moment. My father's voice at the congressional hearing had cut through decades of institutional avoidance. And now, here we were, watching the industry climb toward something better. As the wheels touched down at Reagan National, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. The fight wasn't over. There would be pushback, loopholes, attempts to roll back progress when the headlines faded, but the structure was in place. The Reed Protocol was no longer just a directive, it was becoming culture. We taxied toward the gate. Ava packed her case, glancing at me. "You know, I've been thinking about that day in Charlotte. If you hadn't made the call to divert," I finished the thought for her, "none of this happens." She tilted her head. "Do you regret it?" I looked past her, toward the dark glass of the terminal reflecting the plane's lights. "Sometimes," I said slowly, "to get an entire industry flying in the right direction, you have to be willing to land one airplane immediately." Ava smiled, the kind that carried both understanding and agreement. "Then let's keep flying it." We disembarked together, stepping into the concourse. No cameras, no swarm of reporters, just the muted bustle of travelers heading home or away. And somewhere above, in the quiet sky we'd just left, another plane carried another crew, another set of passengers, each interaction a small but vital part of the system we'd fought to change. I didn't need to see it to know. The ascent had begun, and this time it was quiet, steady, and for everyone.